How do you use tech to tell a human story? I think sometimes people put the cart before the horse and then their thing turns out to just be a tech demo. They make something that like looks crazy but doesn't move you. You have to have a good story, but then trying to actually make something that is new and unique is also part of it.
You're listening to Lights Camera Crypto, the podcast exploring all things entertainment and Web3. I'm your host, Stephen Ladden, and this week our guest is filmmaker Kyle Vorbach. In this episode, Kyle details his path as a filmmaker, a path that focuses intimately on the intersection of tech and film. Kyle also shares how he incorporates AI into his work, his thoughts on the future of AI and entertainment, and also shares more on his latest project, a comedic short somewhere in between, starring Taylor Misiak and Ryan O'Flanagan, which recently screened at the Tribeca Film Festival. Let's dive in. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Got a chance to look at some of your work, really cool stuff. And we'll cover the gamut of it. But I'm just curious from the beginning, did you always know that being a filmmaker was the path for you? Was that out the gate? Hey, I want to do this because you're a talented guy. When did it start?
I will tell you, I wanted to be a video game designer when I was in high school.
Hmm.
And that was before it was cool. Like right now, video games are like the biggest industry on the planet. When I was doing it, was when I was in high school, which was I don't want to date myself. Long ago, if I said I made video games in high school to anyone in my high school, I would have lost both of my friends. But that's what I wanted to do. And then one day, I also made little dumb videos on the side with my friends. And one day, a girl I had a crush on came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw your video. It was very funny." And I was like, I guess I have to do this for the rest of my life. I will be chasing this high. So then I was like, I got into making things and putting myself in them because I've always been a bit of a goof. And then for me, like in the same way that video games, the art and the tech are so married to each other. With me, so is filmmaking. So I always approach things like, how can we use the latest thing to make something that was not possible 5 years ago?
So it's being on the precipice of whatever emerging technology is there and then figuring out how to incorporate it into what is intrinsically part of your creative mind.
Right. How do you use tech to tell a human story? I think sometimes people put the cart before the horse and then their thing turns out to just be a tech demo. They make something that like looks crazy but doesn't move you. You have to have a good story, but then trying to actually make something that is new and unique is also part of it. Paint used to be like a brand new thing. Like certain colored paints have become part of the discourse of art itself. Because if
Sure.
you look like 1,000 years ago, they weren't able to do venti black or whatever that crazy one is. So I like James Cameron is like the best example of a guy who's, oh, I want to make this thing, but it's not possible. I will figure out how. And I'm like the very like the young trying to make it do something similar. He's my boy, is what I'm trying to say.
Got you. And so, do you think your predisposition or your early interest to video games was what set you on that path to find the merge between or the merger between film and tech and have that sort of at the epicenter of your creative output?
Absolutely. When you look at like any of my stuff that I've made, I could point to every single thing I've made and been like, that is from a cutscene from this game, like Kingdom Hearts over there or Halo 3 over there. I remember how everyone has that moment where your brain is like malleable and forming and soft, and then you see something that like unlocks like the root API key of your brain. For me, that was when Halo 3 released, and they on the bonus disc, they had like hours of content about the making of Halo 3. And I saw that and I was like, "Oh my God, this is the I don't know what about it, but just like seeing people playing on the computer in my head and then it turns into a video game. I thought that was incredible. And then for me, it was a thing of I also have a bit of vanity. So I was like, okay, can I apply the sitting on the computer element to something where my stupid face is in it? And then that's where the two kind of coincided.
Gotcha. Okay. And when coming up with ideas for story, was that also influenced by tech as well, or does that come from a different place for you?
For the people listening, I just did a AI short film that was about me using Stable Diffusion back when that was hot on the scene to fake my social media presence for a month and a half, and I got everyone on my social media to think I was leaving this or living this incredible new life. I moved, I got a new apartment, I had a cool new car, I met celebrities, and but the story is about how I go insane while trying to fake my life. And the two, it's Mr. Robot vibey of just like a dude descending into madness through his computer. And that one in particular, I knew I wanted to do something with the tech, right? There's a way to make fake images and trick people right now. How fun. But the story I found was about how real life and our fake lives are often two diametrically opposite things. And that was the human story in the middle of it. So that one, like on all these things, I think I do approach it with the sense of here's an idea for a thing I have that has not been made. Like a thing I honestly the way I come about it is I want to express something because I'm sad. Is usually where things come from.
Sure.
That one I felt lonely, so I was like, I'm gonna make a thing about loneliness. I just had a film play at Tribeca, and that one came from I'm super anxious, and so is my writing partner. It usually comes from there being I feel this, someone else might feel it too, and then the next step is how can we extrapolate this as much as possible and give it some sort of either make it possible through tech in a way that would otherwise be financially unable you would be unable to do so previously, or oh, this is a brand new type of thing, let's do that.
In a lot of ways, it's both an expression. You're taking what emotionally you're desiring to express, putting that with emerging tech, as you've mentioned, and figuring out how to use that to express something new.
I have so much respect for the people who are like, we only shoot on codec film and we do everything practically or whatever. And maybe I would too if I had billions of dollars. But right now, what tech is allowing people to do is it levels the playing field. It allows people to not only it raises the floor for what you're able to do. Everyone, there's a higher baseline for what someone can do on a computer, but it also raises the ceiling if you're already an expert on these things. It's almost like the Overton window of quality gets raised into you're allowed to do better stuff easier. So for me, since I don't have billions of dollars on this Tribeca film, for example, we needed to make something that felt like a blockbuster film. That would not have been possible were I not able to leverage technology to help that happen.
And what did you use to make that happen? What tech did you explore for this one that previously maybe you had dabbled with, but for this one you were like, you know what, this makes the most sense for the type of story I'm trying to tell.
When you do a film, it feels like you're planning a heist because you have 3 days or so to where everything coincides. All your planning happens on these 3 days, and whether you have something good or bad will be made there, usually, unless you save it in the edit. So when you're planning that, it for us, we almost essentially did a virtual version of when they do the fake heist in Ocean's 11, where I used AI to 3D scan in the entire place. I didn't use AI actually. I used back then we only had LiDAR scanning. Now you have better AI scanning. 2 years ago, before this new technology existed,
Wow.
yeah, that's how quick it changed. I now
Yeah.
use God, what's it called? There's a bunch of emerging AI ones for creating like photorealistic scans that are really good now. At the time, I was using this app called Polycam on my phone. I 3D scanned the entire place in that we're going to be shooting, and then brought that into Blender because Unreal Engine did not have Unreal Engine 5 out yet 2 years ago in the Stone Age. So I used Blender, and then we were able to plan out every single shot we were going to get, and then I did use AI to synthesize voices on this previs. And I literally cut the movie before we even shot it and watched it and went, does it work? Before we went in. And there were certain things where we're
Whoa.
like, oh, we don't need this. We don't need this. But you're able to light the actual space with digital lights and actually frame it up with physically accurate cameras digitally in the space. So you can get something that's a good approximation of your final shot months before you even go in there. So we were able to watch the movie and go, oh, we don't need this shot. Save the time, moving on. So we shot 17 pages in just 3 days because we went in there, Pete, like we knew what we were doing.
Sure. And when you say you shot it, essentially you watched the movie before you shot it, did you have the cast as part of the sort of the, call it the, I don't even want to call it a rough cut, but the preview of what you would be shooting when you were able to see the called the R&D cut.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
were you able, did you use the actual cast for that? Were there like, how did all that
We
function
had
to?
we had 3D scans of one of our actors. And we had, but primarily it was my writing partner, co-producer, creative partner on this, and my DP and I looked through everything and made sure that this was the film that we wanted to make. But in planning this, we were, because it's an action comedy, what we were making, we were like, okay, these are the setups where these two shots, we will do a lot of improv here. Let's design this so this part is a sandbox to play in. We can cut however way here and make up some stuff here, and then we could get out of there. So we established a few places for us to play on the day, and then other more complicated things. We were like, okay, this has to be shot this way and this way for it to actually scan.
What's really neat about you communicating this process is it's similar to how companies are using the metaverse to, say, roll out a some companies might roll out a digital product that then, if it's successful, they might say it's a fashion item. They might put that then into a line in the real world. And what you're kind of saying here is, hey, we were able to diagnose any potential, not all, because that's the beauty of filmmaking, but any potential problems along the way, and trim the fat by seeing it before you do it. And that seems to be a novel way of looking through things typically. Or is it just the next evolution of going through a shooting script and chopping what you don't need and moving on? Or is this sort of, do you view this as the next evolution in that process, or is this something unique and specific to this film?
I know previs has been a thing that's been around for a million years. People planned it out. People did storyboards of their stuff. Marvel famously will actually send entire action sequences to previs houses, and those are essentially directed by people at the previs house. If I was directing a Marvel movie, they wouldn't be like, "Hey Kyle, where should Iron Man shoot his whatever?" It would essentially be like, I do the dialogue, and then this is what the action sequence is going to be. Oh, just slap your name on it. There's a weird thing going on there. What we do, I'm fortunate enough to have the hand in the tech side as well, is that we're a small team and we're able to very much do this all ourselves. So it's the same core crew experimenting prior to the actual shooting day. I think that would be the main difference. It's not a bunch of other people. It's the same people as if we were actually there, but it's a lot cheaper because we're sitting on my couch. But
Sure.
but I do think some people with filmmaking specifically, people are always going to be purists. People like it comes from the theater side of people, the practical side of people want to do it the old-fashioned way, and that's cool. And I think, hang on, my dog is scratching at my door right now. Coco. No, she's in all my stuff. I do think that I think what it allows people to do is it allows the people to break in easier potentially. And I think it also democratizes storytelling, all technology, because it's allowing people who might have had zero chance on an old film camera or with a studio setup or lights or whatever. People are allowed to blend the technical space and the virtual space and the practical space now. And hey, like people like make incredible short films on YouTube, and it's just like a guy with a camera now, and half the people in it are him deep faked onto different people deep faked onto his body and stuff. Like you could make your own film almost at this point, and it's literally just you. We're
Wow.
getting close to that. You can synthesize entire voices. You could put other actors' faces on your face. It's essentially you can mocap, man. I could go into my garage right now, right? And I can do mocap for a monster and then I can fight the monster. Or I can mocap a guy who fights the monster. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and that is so good looking now, and that's only gonna get better looking. There are people who want to do the improvised stuff, but hey, man, if you're like 16 years old and you have a story about a knight that fights a monster, 20 years ago, good luck. Now it's like you honestly might be able to make that pretty well.
20 years ago, it might have been a diorama that you had to construct, and that was the extent, or even have some, unless you had access to a ridiculous budget and some awesome props and an incredible stage, like to your point, you probably weren't creating something that looked like what's a fantastic Princess Bride.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And to
But
your point, by the way, I just want to say all these things right now are things that have existed for a while in some form. But what AI is doing is, again, being like, it's making a lot of things so much easier. It's ridiculous. Yeah, you can render like a whole environment. Some things you can just have an AI do, or it loosens up the whole thing. I think some people think AI is, oh, suddenly everything's possible. No, what it is, suddenly everything's easier.
and that's a good point because we were talking earlier about ChatGPT and other technological advances, you could say, and there seems to be some faction of folks that fear the tech might overtake jobs and stuff like that. But I think largely what we're talking about in this conversation and just in general, the tech's here to help, not replace, because it doesn't work without the human element, and
Yeah.
that's key.
We're going to find that out the hard way as soon as they try to replace writers. We've all messed with ChatGPT or something, and it's funny to have it generate a script or something. And it gets away with generating stuff that no one has any passion for and doesn't require pathos or whatever. But when it gets to the point where it's like, it's not going to be writing a good TV show or a good feature film or a surprising twist or anything because it hasn't lived life and
Right.
it can only imitate previous things. So I don't think any writer worth their salt is trying to replace themselves with ChatGPT, but I think what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to be trying to there's always a war on writers. What's the quote? It's something like if we could just it's from like the producers or something. It's if we could just get rid of these directors and writers, we're golden. That's for some reason what everyone wants to do here. Why don't we have AI figuring out how to clean the ozone or whatever?
Sure.
But first on the chopping block, writers. Fuck them. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
And then
All right, yeah.
mic drop.
Yeah, yeah. You can't see me right now, listeners, but I just ran out of the room.
He went out on the F bomb. So it's not I think what we're really trying to say is it's a compliment, and that anybody, what you were saying with your love with tech, it's or love for tech, it's something that helps the process. It's not something that replaces anything. If anything, it replaces habits or a slower way of doing a particular task, but the art itself still has to have the intangibles, a good story, compelling characters, the emotional component. Like all of that isn't, you can't fabricate it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's, what also that AI video I did was about in the sense of it cannot fulfill you.
Sure.
If you try to manufacture a reality through this stuff, you will be left. It's honestly touch grass is the moral of a lot of things.
Sure. Have you encountered, with all this said, have you encountered any difficulties by being, call it tech positive, because you enjoy advances in tech and you are a filmmaker and you enjoy the convergence of those two worlds? Has it ever hindered your process? Has it ever made things more difficult, even though on paper it was supposed to help?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, so if you are very tech positive, you often get pigeonholed as a tech person. And when you are an artist, you mentioned to me before we were recording how there's a viewpoint in the world of how tech can be viewed as art, like good tech can be viewed that way. I think some people see art as tech too, the whole tech demo thing I was saying to you. So for me, an experience I've had a lot of times is I will do a whole project that is like really like this AI thing I keep talking about that I made that. And to me, I find that to be a very personal sort of story. I think the people who watch it, it's like there's a combination of humor and almost cringing at what I'm doing. And also we can relate by the end of it. And so I was very proud of that. What a lot of people see is, hey, look, this guy's good at mid journey. And that has hindered me a lot in
Mm,
life where I have to actively be promoting myself and separating, yeah, this is a very interesting thing, but hey, look, I wouldn't have been able to do this if I wasn't also an artist here.
right.
Well, after that video, I got so many messages being like, hey, do you want to come into our company and make images? I'm like, no, like the whole thing was I want to go make films that are good. I just happen to be this one happened to be AI. And I really do think there are possibilities to make really incredible new things with AI. But I'm not just trying to be a guy at an industry showcase being like, "Hey, look at this weird thing I made." I'm trying to still make films. I'm just empowered by this stuff. I think a lot of people have had similar experiences too.
Sure. So the rub is more not putting yourself in a tech box to the outside and really pushing the adoption of, hey, I happen to, it doesn't matter what tools I use to create the product. It's more the end product that you guys should be focusing on.
Exactly. It's the any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic thing, where your film, you should be watching something and thinking, this is a good movie. You shouldn't be thinking about how it was made, generally. When you're watching Avatar, the new Avatar movie, you should, in theory, be watching it thinking, wow, I really am involved in this world here. You shouldn't be picturing the guys in the mocap suits and all the 3D animation while you are living that experience. That is my belief. Trying to separate those peas and carrots as much as I can moving forward to just make it as seamless as possible. Like with this film I just had go to Tribeca, we have a short film. It's a time travel rom-com called Somewhere in Between. So that one, there is so much VFX going on in it, but the difficulty, anyone can do really obvious VFX. To make really obvious VFX look good is also its own skill. But a third skill is doing VFX and making it not obvious that it's even there. And I think most audiences in the world have seen movies where they think it's all practical, and there are so many VFX shots, it's ridiculous. Like The Dark Knight had, I don't even want to estimate, like thousands of VFX shots, even though Nolan is Mr. Practical Boy. So our film here that we had, the hard part was I didn't want this one to feel, I was coming off this AI thing and I was like, this one should just feel like a practical 80s blockbuster where they had to shoot it on film. That was the whole goal. So the VFX process took an unbelievably long amount of time to actually do that. And I was using AI, of course, in the VFX. And there was 3D modeling, there was a ton of fluid simulations and stuff, like all this high level stuff to make something that I'm hoping no one really questions.
What's really interesting is filmmaking in general, whether it's TV, film, creating something, we've talked about it already. Writers, directors, producers, cast, all that exists. So, in many ways, it sounds like what you're saying too is the VFX or the newer tech elements. If they're distracting, they'll pull people out and have you thinking about, oh, who created these. At the same time, though, you could have an overly written scene or acting that might have been on a certain end of the spectrum that also pulls you out. So I don't think necessarily tech tech's just one other ingredient in that creative cauldron that could, if it's done well, keep people engaged, and if it's not, it has the same effect.
Exactly. I think VFX artists in particular are, because there's this kind of thing going on right now where everyone's, oh, I don't like VFX, I only like practical. That's like the dominating narrative, at least on film Twitter. And I think that VFX artists in particular are a group of those people who are just as valuable as a lighting guy or whatever
Sure.
on set, but people tend to really just shit on their craft. If you watch Corridor Digital, they have this incredible show that they do where they break down famous scenes from movies and how they do the VFX in this. And it's such like a, they sometimes have the people who worked on these shots on, and sometimes they even have the people on when the shots are like famously bad, like The Mummy, like that Dwayne Johnson shot from the Scorpion King or whatever. And these things are worked on heavily. The amount of time that these VFX artists are working on these things is just as valuable and often way more than what's happening on set. The post tail end on a lot of these things is so long. These are all valuable things. It's all in the same. We're all just trying to tell a story with whatever tools that we are able to use.
Do you think, on that tip, do you think you'll continue to explore the incoming tech trends when it comes to your next projects? And is this part of your filmmaking DNA, or Is there a cap for you where you might say, all right, hey, I've amassed experience with all of these new and emerging tech tools. I think I have a good pulse. What you were saying before, not trying to be boxed as a tech guy, or is it finding a way to continue to carve your niche and carve your lane and also happen to stay on track with what's coming next?
I think for me, and I think this is common with a lot of people, is when you approach a film, you are looking at how do I tell this story? How do I even make this? Like you're sitting in some room in Los Angeles and you have this whole thing in your head and you have to figure out how do I shoot this many images per second and make this actually be a thing people could watch. So you're working backwards from there. So I usually am not approaching something being like, oh, I'm 100% going to use, I want to do something with Unreal, blah, blah, blah. There's some idea in my head that I've had for 10 years or whatever. And then, like for Unreal, you can mount tracking stuff on your camera and very quickly get accurate tracking data to bring into Unreal, have these crazy shots going on in Unreal, and then render that out and bring that into After Effects as a plate and key that into the background of something. Point being, I had an idea I've been sitting on for 10 years. I don't know if I'm ever going to do this, but I've been sitting on this idea for 10 years. Then Unreal 5 comes out and I'm seeing this stuff and I go, oh, I can finally do that one. As opposed
Mm,
to, oh,
mm.
Unreal comes out, man, I got to figure out how to use this thing for something. I think there's a lot of stuff on YouTube in particular where people are making things, and I don't want to cast stones here because they're doing a lot better than I am career wise. But I do think that there are a lot of people on YouTube who do approach things that way. And I find myself bouncing off those pretty quickly, where the entire purpose of a piece of content is to have made it with something as opposed to being empowered to make it with something.
Got it. Got it. So in many ways, what you're saying is it is the tech will certain tech at certain times may come about which will allow you to execute on an idea that either you've had for 10 years or something that you've thought of recently, but it's more about asking yourself the question of how can I physically do this and then finding the answers as to what's available to you.
Yes, exactly.
Right on. And maybe talk a little bit about with your most recent film, Somewhere in Between, what went into that creatively and what sort of inspired the Ascension? And you mentioned it screened at Tribeca. What's that process been like?
It's been a roller coaster, honestly. This film was like the little engine that could. My writing partner and I, John Haran, we do comedy, and we wanted to write a film. Like you'll add everything I've just talked. I'll walk you through the process, and you'll be like, "Oh, that's what he means." We wanted to write a film that was about anxiety and especially the anxiety of when you have feelings for like your best friend or something, telling them that feels like the end of the world.
Mm,
That is the scariest thing you can do. So we were like, okay, how do we make it actually feel like, how do we realize those stakes as a dramatic device? So we couldn't figure it out. We at one point we had like one that was like a detective thing. Finally, we got to what if it was literally the end of the world? And for those listening, the sort of setup is there are in Back to the Future, right? He has his parents. He goes back in time and says, "You two need to fall in love, or else the whole timeline gets thrown into chaos." This
yeah.
is essentially a film from those parents' point of view. We have two friends who are staying in on New Year's, and they won't they kind of thing. And then a guy from the future shows up and says, "If you don't fall in love tonight, the entire universe will be destroyed." And that's like the first 3 minutes of the film. So it goes from there. And then we wrote this. We looked at our inspirations. Obviously, Zemeckis, Back to the Future. We've been getting compared to Bill and Ted, and we try to figure out how to package that up, how to make this, and that includes building a time machine, all this stuff. But when we were writing the script, all we were thinking about was the story. We got to the end of the script and went, "Oh shit, we have to make a time machine. How are we going to do this?" And it was just like our heads were exploding then. But at the time, we were like, "Oh, cool! Of course, there will be a photorealistic time machine." They find as if you could just go to the store and buy one of those. After the writing process, we go into producing that bad boy. We had to build a time machine that was designed in Blender, 3D CAD. You could do in Blender with actual measurements and stuff. So we went to Home Depot, having never used what's also technology, technically a buzz saw. So we had to figure out how to physically
Sure.
manufacture a time machine. And they don't teach you that in film school, production design. I wish they did. We built this whole thing, which is also technology. Honestly, we had to do electrical wiring on the inside of the thing. He's like the time traveler is like interacting with practical panels and all this stuff inside of there, wiring that all up. When we get to the actual shooting time, that's where we started getting into the tech side because we were trying to figure out, okay, 17-page script. We have 3 days to shoot this. And there's essentially two action sequences, which like take an exorbitant amount of time for less shots, right? How do we actually go about making this? That's where we were planning it out ahead of time. Can we cut any of this? Is any of this even necessary? We found out no, some of it doesn't even need to be in there. Action sequence stuff. Will this cut at all? How do we have to shoot it? Because we don't have time to be like, I think it looks good this way. We have to go, this is the framing. We have to go in, we have 10 minutes to get the shot. This is the exact framing for this thing. And we were also going in there with the knowledge of, hey, we could put a fog machine behind here for this smoke, but
Sure.
we don't have time to reset for 10 minutes prior to every take here. We might need to just turn around and roll. So we go, okay, fog machine, put a little smoke in the air or some hazer, but there's a ton of like debris that gets involved. There's all this smoke and stuff. And I used the 3D models of this set to then bring that into Blender and then run 3D simulations for digital smoke, digital debris that's physically acting on the stuff that we already had. Stuff like that allowed us to save a ton of time on set and make the movie for a much smaller budget. The amount of money it takes to keep everyone on set to do this stuff is way more than the amount of money it takes for me to sit at a computer for way too much time.
Sure. And do you find that there's a benefit to one way or the other? Or if all things considered, say money and time weren't factors, which obviously on most films they are, would you have a pick over one or the other? Or is it just, does it depend on the idea? Does it depend on what's needed? Is one, would you say one's better or worse, or is that not even the language you would want to use?
I think that there are people who are practical purists and they say everything needs to be real on set. I think that there are people who are like, we'll do it entirely in post, like with George Lucas on the Star Wars prequels. I think that the real world that is the best is a combination because honestly, sometimes stuff in post looks cooler than it does in real life. Sometimes you want stylized, and sometimes, for safety reasons or whatever, if in the magical world where everything's free for some reason, you'd want people to have something on set to actually react to and that grounds it in reality. And then this other post thing that's a canvas that you can make, oh, that explosion is going to explode this exact way, like this. Or the environment will the colors, there's all these things that you could paint with almost like that is absolutely from zero creative as opposed to having to work backwards from actual footage. I think that allows in this magical world, I think this allows more people to do their art. I
Mm,
do think that, as technology advances, let's say even now, the stuff that we're able to do is much more complicated than what we were able to do 30 years ago. Does that mean budgets have shrunk? No. We just keep thinking of more complicated stuff to do. And it just ideas, the things that you could even accomplish are going to keep getting bigger and everyone's going to be pushing the boundary infinitely until we are completely in a world where you could just generate your thoughts in real time
sure.
as your imagination. Until that happens, we will be pushing the boundary.
Sure. And so really it sounds like what we're talking about here are just tools in a toolbox. You mentioned it with paint, taking it back, how certain colors weren't able to be conceived at one point in time. Now it's just there's an array of tools. You can choose to use them if they best fit your project, if they best fit your idea. You don't need to. There's no right or wrong. It's just what helps a person execute his or their idea to the best of their ability.
Yeah, I think that's the absolute best way to look at these things.
Somewhere in between. What's the next step for that? You just screened at Tribeca. What's in motion for that right now?
Our Tribeca premiere went excellently, and that was an insane 2 weeks where we met a ton of great people, and it was very validating, and we really saw the potential of our project. The next step for it, as most people who ever screen a film anywhere, everyone always goes, "Oh, we're going to make a feature of it." This was designed from the ground up to be a proof of concept for a feature. We wanted to make something that crushed as 15 minutes and
Mm.
made you wish it was longer. That's how our entire creative process has gone towards this. So we have a script ready to go. Hey, it's Steven Spielberg, if you're listening. He doesn't fund projects. But that's the goal. We are still on the circuit with this stuff. We are trying to, we submitted to a gazillion festivals, peek behind the curtain here, and just hurry up and wait. So we already had our Tribeca thing. That couldn't have gone any better. We are looking at, okay, what low budget film can we actually make here? We think we have a solid shot with it. And part of that, honestly, like to not keep circling back to this, but look, when we go and do the feature version of this, we are going to be pulling out every single trick in the book to make it for whatever budget this kind person who's listening will give us. So that is going to be, we have action sequences, we're going to have special effects, we're going to have all these things that are staples of 1980s blockbusters. And I am going to ensure that we do not have to compromise what is in the script to make that happen in the same way we did in the short.
And when you talk about compromising, it again comes back to what tech or what element or what device best serves a particular scene or a particular sequence. It's all about the convergence of creative thought, creative idea, and how is that best executed. And you guys will figure that out.
Exactly.
Right on. You mentioned being, call it directorially typecast with tech. Given your predisposition to it, do you ever think that you'll branch out and do something that isn't, say, quote unquote tech oriented, and yet it will be because, as we've already established, like it's also part of who you are as a filmmaker? So, like, it seems like those two things are at opposite ends of the spectrum.
It's so funny you say that. There's a script I'm working on right now where it's the germ of the idea was I am going to do something that has no effects. It is just going to be a couple people talking and I will prove that I'm a great director under any circumstances. But then I kept being like, what'd be cool is this thing that's only possible digitally, like that is literally, I don't care how much money you have, is not possible in real life. It has to be digital. And then I was back to the square one of being like, this serves the story. I should do this. As much as I try, I keep circling back to that. So I think in my head, at least, at some point, I will just punch through where it stops mattering. It's on the way up, you definitely get pigeonholed for some of these things. And then at some point, it becomes your style. But on the way up, they just go, oh, he can only do it's like Wes Anderson on the way up. They're like, oh, he can only make these quirky, symmetrical, colorful things. See, that's all he can do. It's how I feel with my stuff. But then later on, you go, oh, that's his trademark. I'm hoping to get to the point where they start going, oh, yeah, that's because he chooses to do that. It's
Right.
not just he's stupid, you know?
What helps motivate you and keep you on track when making those decisions? Is it that it's organically just, again, who you are and what your vision is, and it's you just executing on your own interests and what you like and how you see the world and how you see certain situations, or what helps you lean into you?
I like the way you said that sounded like a Connor Oberst lyric or something. So poetic is what I'm saying. I think there is a fallacy with creative stuff that there is. It's the auteur fallacy. This idea that there's one guy doing this. There's a phrase for this called the lone genius myth that all these great things boil down to just one guy going crazy with this. I don't believe that to be true. Actually, my company is called Lone Genius for the express purpose of pointing out that I do not believe in this shit. It was sarcastic at the time. Then I got people were like, "Oh, you mean that?" And I was like, "God damn it!" But I think that all of this stuff is super collaborative. So I think what you do as a director is you come into something with the purpose. You have your own point of view, obviously, but what you're there to do is empower everyone who's actually an expert in what they do to do their best work. You are literally, you are directing, you are going this way, everyone, and everyone can focus their efforts into a single thing. So when it comes down to what is right for a thing, it is honestly it's a conversation. A lot of people being very empathetic. This is the thing that AI cannot replace is on set, someone being like, hey, this doesn't sound truthful to me, like the way this is, or this doesn't look, I know this doesn't look a way that makes me feel something. And that is something that an AI will not be able to approximate necessarily. It's so contextual. So I do believe that with all these things, it's just a bunch of people shooting from the hip. It's messy. You have these masterpieces throughout history. If you look at how Star Wars was made, honestly, it was George Lucas's wife just decided, hey, the third act is boring. I'm going to cut the entire thing up and do something crazy with it. That's a famous story. That was just one person being like, I'm going to have an opinion that changes the world.
Yeah.
That's how all these things are. It's all art is just feeling, and where it gets tricky is the merging of art and commerce. I don't think that everyone somehow this all got polluted with a profit motive, and I get it because these things cost money. As tech evolves, hopefully we get to a place where the cost basis can be a little lower and it can allow people to get weirder. Right now we're in a stage where movies are 90% VFX. It's extremely expensive, and for that reason, people have tried to figure out the formula of what works. And that's not to cast stones again. I apparently only shit on other people, but that's how we got into this situation where a lot of industries are in crisis right now.
Sure. In terms of what you have coming up, what's in the pipeline, I know you mentioned a couple things. Obviously, there's seeing the short somewhere in between through, and that's, as we know, a process. What can you speak to that you're excited about that's coming up, that's on the horizon, either with that project or anything else?
Absolutely. I would love to plug a few things. If anyone has made it this far, if I've not deterred them with my rambling, I do think that when you're listening to someone talk about their short films, I feel like that to most people is inherently off-putting. I do think that maybe a few people made it this far because they may have seen my AI video online. That did pretty well. That the one where I go crazy, and I'm trying to work with AI on future projects. I'm starting a podcast about the AI and the dangers of AI as I see it, called Pandora's Code. That will be coming out soon. I don't have a date yet. I am also working on more short films. I got some stuff coming, but something that also might interest filmmakers, if there are any filmmakers listening, is this film that we made. My writing partner and I, we made Somewhere in Between, time travel rom-com, designed from the ground up to be a proof of concept for a feature, and also we designed it to be a silver bullet to get into at least some festivals. That was our absolute goal from day one. We wanted to make something that felt different, that felt like a feature, even though it was short, and that it would get in somewhere. So I'm putting together a series of videos essentially breaking down each step of our production process and the specific things that we did that you can do too to elevate what you're making and leverage the tools that you do have to make a more polished product to communicate your idea.
Kyle, where can people find you if they want to see more of your work or learn more about what we just talked about, the upcoming podcast, the shorts themselves? Where can people find you?
I am so easy to find online. I am my name at Kyle Vorbach on literally everything. So find me everywhere. That all that stuff's going up on YouTube very soon. You can find them on my YouTube channel. And yeah, hopefully this goes well enough where you don't have to find me and you will just be aware of me.
There it is. Kyle, appreciate the time and talk soon.
Thanks so much, man. You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Lights, Camera, Crypto, a podcast produced by Matt Bogart and Decential Media. Music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. If you enjoyed this experience, be sure to rate and subscribe to our show and to follow @Sladden and @Decential Media for additional content.